Delighted to say our Lauren Bellcross, former Labour advisor, and first time here, Charles Amos, who is a political writer. Good morning to the two of you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Nice to see you back, and thank you very much indeed for coming in. Right, we'll start with you, Lauren. Labour, I've been on holiday, right? Come back. Labour's got amazing ideas because they think they're going to win the election. A pledge card. Let me think back. A pledge card. That comes back to 1997, doesn't it? Yes.
Except it's now a digital pledge card, so you can scan a QR code and you can add it to your iWallet, I'm told, by colleagues in the party. Yeah.
Right.
I don't know why you'd want it in your iWallet, but it's nice to sort of remember it now. But
no, I wouldn't. Would you want it in your iWallet?
No.
No. Okay, so that's that's it. Right, so here I am thinking, oh, Labour's going to have some amazing pledges because this is how you become a party of government. Now, they talk about economic stability, cutting NHS waiting lists, launching a border security command, which we already have, by the way, setting up Great British Energy, and some of their ministers or shadow ministers don't seem to know how much that's going to cost, and providing more neighbourhood police officers, which we're already seeing, recruiting 6,500 teachers paid for by ending tax breaks for private schools. By the way, the maths of that don't add up. Marks out of 10.
I'd say, look, these are pledges. They're very sort of broad pledges of what's wrong in the country at the minute. You see what's wrong in the country. Is our border command that currently exists working? I'd say most people would say no, it's not working because we're not stopping the boats and we're not stopping the gangs. Why is it that private schools have tax breaks? Well, I don't think they should.
Why not?
Because they are elitist institutions and they can pay their way in tax.
Why are they elitist institutions?
Because people
are choosing. Well, let's ask Charles. So just in terms of that, let's just go back to the pledges that were set out. Are you inspired?
No, I'd give them 6 out of 10, and I think they're so vague that they can almost always be said to be met by a future Labour government, and I think that really defeats their point. If you're going to have 5 pledges, you really want them to be measurable so people can tick them off by themselves and go, right, you succeeded or you failed. And these pledges don't allow for that. I mean, what is ensuring economic stability? Insofar as there isn't a recession, I suppose there is a degree of stability. But that's not a very high bar to set.
Well, you might be right, but also people remember what Liz Truss did to this country and wiped billions off the economy.
Well, one might say the market's actually bet against her rather than herself. There are people that believe she was right.
And the deficit
she might be right, but I don't think she was, and I don't think the markets think they won, and I don't think the people think she was, because she made reckless decisions without any kind of planning.
Labour backed those reckless decisions.
No, they didn't.
Yes, they did. Because the largest item of expenditure was £60 billion on the energy price cap, and Labour backed that decision.
Those weren't the decisions.
It were peanuts, not raising corporation tax
that were backed
or
by
cutting
Labour.
the 45p rate.
Charles, just in terms of that, and I do think she was maligned. They didn't brief it properly, her mini-budget, and I think she is still being pilloried for what happened. I'm not entirely sure that was true. I think there was a lot in that was right.
What, in her budget?
Yeah.
Well, absolutely. I think cutting the top rate of tax was a good simplification measure. It gave people back the money that was rightfully theirs. Not raising corporation tax, and it wasn't actually a corporation tax cut. It just was not raising it from 19% to 25% was a good idea. And the most expensive policy there, as I said, was the £60 billion energy price cap. And Labour backed that policy, and that was the great
even Conservative chancellors objected to a lot of her measures and said they weren't briefed out properly.
Doesn't mean she wasn't right.
I think it does mean she was, because it ended in disaster after, what, was it 44 days?
She should have committed to spending cuts ahead of the tax cuts.
The thing is,
it wasn't well done.
With a lot of libertarian and sort of defenders of trust, you sound a lot like communists. You say, oh, but this is what hasn't been really tried. Her ideas weren't really tried. She wasn't given a chance.
She had 50 days.
She had a huge majority.
So I want to go back to this VAT thing because you brought it up.
Yeah.
This is so basically what Labour wants to do is to add VAT to private school fees, right? Yeah. So they think that this is a brilliant idea. Now, by the way, if you do that, it only brings in £1.5 billion. There are only 554,316 pupils attending independent schools. Well, I'll tell you what's happened already. On the back of that threat, 2.7% of them have dropped out, which means that actually those kids whose parents are struggling to take them to private school are now in the state sector. That's absolutely insane, isn't it?
And the Treasury analysis that was brought out by the Conservatives yesterday suggests it could cost the state £650 million, and the Adam Smith Institute said it could actually cost £1.6 billion because you get people that are currently, or rather students that are currently in the private sector going to the state sector.
So it's brings in 1.5 billion. It's going to cost 1.6
Well, according
billion.
to a free marketeer think tank, because I think that analysis will be disputed.
What about the very point that there are people out there who choose not to go on holiday, who choose not to buy expensive stuff, who do everything they can to send their kids to independent schools? By putting 20% VAT on that, all that will do is make sure that they can't afford to pay for it. They then go into the state system.
How is it fair that you get this kind of division, the Etons of this world, where people get to educate?
These schools have charitable status currently.
I don't think they should have charitable status. But they're not charities.
Hang on a minute, but what are you doing?
They're not a charity.
You just want to abolish them, basically.
I don't want to abolish them. I'm saying adding VAT on it to pay for other bits of the education sector, to pay for
do you not
more
understand
equality.
the irony of that? That you're going to force more people into the state system, and that's going to cost the state more.
But you're talking about creating this elitism and this institution. There's very few
Are you
people.
doing it? You're doing it.
No, because private schools have been sort of given this charitable status because they're going to contribute to the community and do wonderful things. They're not doing that. They're not offering huge amounts of scholarship to poorer children. They're not doing that. They're creating an elite. They're creating the Boris Johnsons, the David Camerons of this world.
What about the Labour ministers?
Let's just
there's some of those as well.
There are a lot of them.
Let's
not
just
as many as in the Conservative
Charles,
Party.
Let's just accept at the moment that you're right, and they do create an elite. I still don't think that's reason to put 20% VAT on them. If you're wealthy, you have a right to send your children to private schools, and if that relatively disadvantages others, then
it's
so
not relatively,
be it.
it's objectively disadvantages
It's not objectively disadvantages.
What about
others.
freedom of choice?
You can choose. You can just pay a bit more and not have these private schools.
But you're missing the point.
No,
What
because
about,
these institutions are not charities. I do not believe they are charities. Therefore, they shouldn't be given tax-exempt status because of that, because they are not a charity.
But you're happy, therefore, for those kids whose parents can only barely afford to get them into or keep them in private schools, then to leave that system to go into the state system, which is going to cost more money. That's counterintuitive.
We're only citing the very small examples of it. We're not citing the leaders of foreign countries who send their kids to these elite institutions. We're not citing the people who own half the country sending these kids to elite institutions. Most of the listeners on this channel won't be able to afford to send their kids to these institutions. They want the state sector. This is a bit of an anathema because we're talking about. We're talking about these elite institutions. We're not talking about the ordinary schools that aren't getting better.
Let's ask Charles. But my understanding is that many of these institutions, you're talking about Eton and Harrow, there are many private independent schools that are not in that league at all.
Well, I think the average fee for private schools is £18,000. So my colleague...
as a day pupil.
As a day pupil. So you are right in saying most people could never afford to send their children to a private school. But the wealthy in this country already contribute more than enough to pay for any of their costs. I don't think it's at all unreasonable to have private schools exempt from VAT. They already pay for state education as it is. Why should they be forced on threat of jail to pay again through VAT?
That's a slight exaggeration.
It is threat of jail because tax is always backed up by a threat of jail.
But they're paying twice.
VAT.
They're paying twice.
They're paying VAT on top of it, which I think they should do.
Well, Charles's point is valid. They're paying twice. They're paying for the state system and they're paying for an independent education.
Well, no, but that's a rhetorical talking point because you're taking them out. No, I don't think they are paying twice.
What do you mean? No, they are paying twice. You just don't have a problem with them paying twice.
No, they're paying for their tuition fee to exclude themselves. It's not as if it's suddenly a big... They're not doing the world a service by saying, oh, well, we're going to put our kids in this elite institution.
Yes, they are, because they're not taking up state resources,
so patriotic of them to put their kids in this elite institution that's going to make them do.
Are they taking up state resources?
It doesn't matter if they're taking up state resources. They're putting... So you think it's actually a beneficial thing for the society to have these people in private elite institutions? They're doing society a service, are they?
I think arguably, yes.
I think a lot of people are going to disagree with you.
Well, let's just broaden that. I have to go to a break. But people who take out private healthcare, are you saying they shouldn't do that either?
I didn't say that. I'm talking about private schools.
But the example is very similar, isn't it? Because you're taking yourself out whilst you're already paying for the NHS. It is an exact parallel.
I don't think it is an exact parallel because a lot of people will use private healthcare where there's gaps. I think the argument, again, we fixate
people
on...
use independent education where there are gaps.
But we fixate on these hyper points. What needs to happen is improve the quality of standard that the state provides, not focus on...
Which even on your own grounds won't work because this policy will cost at least £650 million to the state.
And on that note, I shall go to a break before Phil explodes in the gallery. Don't go anywhere. More head-to-head after this break.
And private schools. I'm feeling on good territory today.
Rents?
I think Rachel Reeves' plans were very careful in that where the local authority feels there needs to be. So I think most authorities up and down the country may not need to, so fine, that's not an issue. But if you go to somewhere like London, it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue where something has to be done, where for example, I grew up in Kilburn in northwest London. I couldn't afford to live there now, let alone buy there now. And it's not just rent caps that will solve it, but it's one of a number of measures.
Is it building more houses?
Yeah, it is that. I think sort of councils of all colours have been woeful in that, because they cater to NIMBYs who, you know, will find any odd objection and just say, oh, well, we can't build a house because there's a tree, or we can't build a house because there's this, you know, 20th century brutalist building, which means we can't build any more houses on it.
But Charles, I think also people labour under the false impression that landlords often own multiple properties. Sometimes, and in fact many occasions, people have one property they rent out, they rely on it for a second income or indeed for a pension. And so if you then have rent control on those properties, it means, as we saw in Scotland, people think it's not worth having. You will have already lost many deductions from having a second property. So surely you just say, well, forget this, I'm not going to do it, and therefore your supply of housing goes down yet again.
Well, I would agree, but I think the more important point is this. Just as I should be free to rent out my own labour or my own car at whatever price I choose, analogously, landlords should be free to rent out their houses at whatever price they choose too. But the point about economics that you make is right. Edinburgh introduced rent controls last year, and just as the textbook predicted, homelessness went up. It stands at 1.4% compared to 0.4% for the nation as a whole. So it just doesn't work as well as being wrong. And introducing it where rents are particularly high is an awful idea, because that is where the rent control will be effective. That is where it will create a shortage of housing. And if people don't find homes in those particular areas, due to the rent control, they'll simply go to other places and push up the rents there. So this policy is not going to work. 95% of economists agree. The textbook is clear. I don't know why Labour is even contemplating this absurd idea.
Politics of envy?
I don't think so. Look, it's a politics of reality. The politics of reality is people, in particular cities like London, but it's not just London, it's other major metropolitan areas like Manchester, like Liverpool, like Birmingham. There are young people that can't afford to live everywhere. It used to be 20 years ago, there was the aspiration you could rent your own place. That's a pipe dream for most young people now.
But it does come back down to not building enough houses. And of course, the current government said 300,000 homes. They haven't done that, anything like that. And you're right, it's about the planning. It's about, actually, I think it's about not having bold enough vision. So what we need to do is to create 2 major new cities somewhere.
Yeah. But the problem is no one's going to do that, and everyone's going to object. Look, I'd say I'd give praise to a Conservative Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan, built record numbers of council housing in particular. You know, it's not a left-right issue necessarily. I think there is such a housing crisis, and I think there's a consensus among, certainly I've seen younger people on both sides of the political aisle, that they feel ignored by vested interests who won't do anything about it and won't build more homes and won't tackle the root and problems with it. I think
we all agree on building more homes, but rent control is not going to work. The end of greater housing affordability is not enabled by rent controls, because by putting the price below the market clearing rate, it reduces the supply and it increases the demand, that results in a shortage.
But if you have that with a combination of a mass house building programme to reduce the number...
But let me just throw in...
house building programme.
I think you need
no need for the rent control, because the rent control just creates shortages.
But I think you can just build housing, because there's so many systemic issues that are wrong with housing in this country.
Yeah, get rid of those. Don't go down legislating for rent control or allowing councils.
You need some sorts of drastic measures, because you also have issues with freehold and leasehold in this country, which is a feudal system, which is anachronistic and awful and exploitative. So I think it's not just... Look, it'd be very easy for me to just sit here and attack landlords. I'm not just going to do that. There are a lot of exploitative landlords out there, but they are not.
But I think also for many landlords, what they've seen is their mortgages have gone up so much that they have to then raise their rents, because they then can't make the property wash its face.
And I think my one concern with this is, I think, you know, there is a fair point that a lot of small-time landlords who do use exactly that, and there are a lot of landlords who will just use it as a bit of income and won't be exploitative. If you're forcing them out of the market, you're then just going to get these big conglomerates who don't care about it.
What is exploitation here?
If you're increasing the rent to exploitative levels, which a lot of landlords do.
You can't define exploitation.
If you're increasing rent by 50% in London in a year, as has happened to a lot of people, I'd say a lot of people would say that's exploitative.
Yes, and a lot of people would say it's exploitative, but what is exploitation is what I'm asking. I don't think it really is a concept that applies to the
Well, I think it
housing
is. If
market.
you're suddenly paying 50%, you're being asked to pay 50% more on a place you've been in for 10 years.
It's the landlord's property, he should be able to charge what he likes.
Okay,
just as if you're a labourer, you should be able to charge what you like.
Well, he's able to, and I'm able to say he's an exploitative, greedy
But then you choose
individual.
not to live there.
Yeah,
But
you choose to. You're
it's a
being
bit like
forced
a
out of
taxi
there.
Not
service,
being
for
forced
example.
out
If the
You are being
taxi,
forced
hang
out.
on a minute, if the taxi service says this is the price of the taxi and it's too much for you, you choose not to take that taxi, surely.
Yeah, but or there'll be another service.
But then
that'll
you
be
go
available.
into one of these new houses that you've just built under a Labour government.
Although there haven't been any that have been built in 14
No,
years.
well, we're
not
waiting
near
for
enough.
Labour, apparently. Labour's going to do it on day one. Going to have loads on day one.
Well,
Also...
to be fair to Keir Starmer, he
Yes.
has pledged to allow for building on the green belt, and I will give him a thumbs up
And
for
of
that.
course, we have to be careful here because it's not the green belt is also a very vague term, isn't
Well,
it? Because
absolutely.
it also encompasses some of the brown belt land as well. We talked right at the beginning here of Labour having these 6 pledges, which there is absolutely no metrics on, so we don't know whether Labour will actually achieve any of it. One of these ones that I keep hearing about is Great British Energy. I have no idea what Great British Energy is going to do. Labour says it will invest £8.3 billion in Great British Energy. Now, Steve Reed, the Shadow Environment Secretary, and I rather enjoyed this, he was presented with claims that between 61 billion and 82 billion would need to be spent on the firm, and he agreed with that. He doesn't even know how much money is involved, and I don't think he knows what Great British Energy is.
Well, I don't know what Great British Energy is. I just know that it's going to cost the taxpayer, if it's implemented, £8.2 billion, and it's supposed to be financed by tax on oil and gas firms.
Don't tell me. VAT on independent schools as well.
Yeah, they want to increase the tax that is already at a level of thievery from 75% all the way to 78%.
What is Great British Energy?
Isn't it interesting that we're talking about energy firms here? So one of the energy firms, EDF, do you know who is the owner of EDF?
Yes.
French government.
The French government. Do you think that they are supplying us altruistically with electricity, or they're making money off of
No,
us?
they're seeking to make
Right,
a profit.
so
Right, thanks for giving me a short answer. I have to go to a break. You can think about that over this break. This is Talk, don't go anywhere. Good morning, I'm David Bull, 8:48, Saturday, May the 18th. Lots and lots of messages coming in. Thank you very much indeed for those. Carol in Shoreham by Sea, very glamorous spot here in the United Kingdom. Great to see you back, David. Lovely tan. Thank you very much indeed. That was not Costa del Shoreham, it was Costa Blanca, actually, I was in. I too was born in Kilburn. This is going back to your point. Oh, yay, for the Kilburn posse. I could not possibly afford to buy a home there 40 years ago. It was always the case. I moved to South London. Thanks for that. Nick in Wiltshire says the concept of endless house building is never going to work without population control. Otherwise, it's a never-ending need. Had mass immigration not happened, house prices would have very slowly decreased. Bob in Edinburgh, good morning to you. Bob says even the Tory and Labour MPs were objecting to housing developments in Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday. Enforce building in every town an equal percentage with schools and infrastructure. And this is the crucial bit, schools and infrastructure. Rent control is proven not to work. Labour to give up their house first. Tax credits for using private anything and not milking the state would win my vote. That's the point. Why are we not incentivising people to use their money wisely to procure services elsewhere, and you remove the burden to the state? That is smart.
That's an interesting point, you know.
It's smart.
Well, I think he's concerned about social mobility above all else,
Right.
even if that means higher costs to the state.
Right, I've got another one for you. Jenny's having a go at you.
Oh.
Jenny, good morning. Lauren. The majority of parents at private schools are both working unbelievably hard to get their children through. Yes, there are outliers, but the majority give up lots of other things to be able to pay for fees. The 20%, this is the point I was trying to make, the 20% increase will push so many back into the state system. Where will these children be absorbed into an already creaking system? Private schools provide a huge amount of bursaries and scholarships. Another great point, actually, I've forgotten that. There will have to, those will go with the increase, and Labour are creating an even bigger problem for themselves. They are underestimating the influx back into the state system where parents will be unable to afford private school fees. Down 2.7%, and that's before you're in power.
Look, I don't think the private school has done nearly enough to justify their tax-exempt status, and I think...
What about the bursaries?
Look, I don't think they do enough of that. I think...
I got a bursary.
congratulations, you're one of very few people who did. I don't think they do enough to justify that. If they had done enough, and if it was, as they say, you know, this great vehicle for social mobility for overwhelmingly loads of people, there wouldn't be this debate.
Jenny's not impressed with you.
I'm sorry, Jenny, to disagree with you, but thank you for calling in.
Lauren is concerned about social mobility, even if it costs the state more money. And if he really takes the argument about social mobility seriously, then he would ban very rich parents from reading to their children, because that too reduces social mobility by relatively disadvantaged
You're better than that.
Those who do not have parents who read to them.
No.
That is the end of the social mobility. Well, I'd like to hear a point at which you stop it.
We're talking about very elite institutions that are taking...
Have you been to a private school? Have you been to an independent school where actually the vast majority of people actually do scrimp and save to send their kids there? I just want to read this one as well. Mike Rippington. Hi, David. I'm a retired electrician. I'm not dripping in gold. We sent our kids to private school. Our local schools were failing them as the classrooms were rammed. They both went straight into work at 18 and are now hard-working, grounded parents. Honestly, 20% more tuition fees would have kept them in the state school, making it harder for the teachers. With mass immigration, how are we going to find spaces in state schools? A lot of comments about this, saying they're struggling to send their kids to independent schools, and you're going to take that away from them.
And I understand the concerns about that, because with 14 years of Conservative management of our education system, and mismanagement, I should say, of the education system, that I understand why people would be apprehensive. What I think the next Labour government will want to do is improve the standards of those schools, reduce the class sizes.
They want to do a lot, don't they?
They do, and there's a lot to be done, because the Conservatives have ruined this country in their 14 years in charge.
Nigel Farage, he's never far away from me, as you know. Nigel Farage says Starmer is Blair without the flair. I laughed this morning when I read that, because I thought it's a great headline.
Well, I would agree entirely. I don't think it's that relevant, though. I mean, it's the substance that matters and not the presentation. So although I agree...
think presentation does matter.
No, I actually think when it comes to politics, it really is the substance. I'd rather have somebody who gets things right who's very dull than somebody who's got lots of flair who gets most things wrong.
I mean, I hear you, but I also disagree, because I think we're so used to Prime Minister's questions being an absolute snooze fest, except when it's Angela Rayner and Oliver Dowden, and then it's just exciting, and people are like, oh, actually, there was some barbs exchange. And similarly, when it was Prescott and William Hague, there's a excitement and an energy brought to our politics. I agree, we do need to focus a lot more on the substance and the issues, but you can do it in a presentationally entertaining way, rather than a snooze fest, which a lot of it is.
Yeah, but Starmer doesn't do that, so he is Blair without the flair, because Blair was a good...
I mean, it's a great line from Nigel Farage. It's a good line,
yeah. Farage is very good at putting those kind of lines
And
out.
I would argue that actually Farage is an amazing orator, and obviously I've been on stage with him many times, and he has the audience in the palm of his hand, and it's an extraordinary gift that he has. And if you have detail as well, and I think you're right, but it's also because we're now in this 24-hour media cycle where you expect people to perform, and people also level the accusation at Rishi Sunak. He's just not very good when it comes to performing in front of cameras.
I think that's true. I think that there's very few politicians who I can think of off the top of my head who had that kind of touch of being able to connect with the audience and be able to just tune in when you're watching telly and think, OK, wow, they've got this. I think Blair's definitely one of them. Bill Clinton, I think also Boris Johnson probably engaged quite a lot of people.
Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Yeah, less so. I think Donald Trump even, controversially.
That's an interesting one, though. Rees-Mogg, you see.
He's a character. He's a character.
And that's the difference. He's a character, isn't he?
He is a character, but I would say he's very good at making speeches, along with Dan Hannan. Now, they're not populist speeches. They're not going to be clipped for YouTube, but if you watch their 8 minutes, they're very good at speaking. Along with Desmond Swayne,
But you see,
example.
that's very interesting about being a character. Margaret Thatcher was a character.
Yeah.
And she obviously enjoyed great popularity. Boris Johnson was a character as well.
Yeah. I think, you know, Nigel's definitely a character as well. I think Nicola Sturgeon as well, like her or loathe her, she was a character, and she was... People listened to what she had to say, even if it was to disagree with a lot of what she had to say.
But I mean, it's just interesting. Keir Starmer talking about changed Labour. Tony Blair spoke about new Labour. This is Farage saying that actually, if you look, it's carbon copy. The shirt, the rolled-up shirt, is absolutely identical. Very quickly, Theresa May believes her election woes, and we remember them very vividly, show there is hope for Sunak to defy the polls. Yes, this is the former Prime Minister. She says that all is not lost at the moment, and Rishi Sunak can turn this around, can he?
No.
Right.
By her own logic, doesn't that mean getting rid of him and installing a more popular leader, i.e. Boris, when they got rid of her when she led the party to single digits?
Well, she also goes on to say that the view on the doorstep here is very different from 1997, so reiterating the view here from Nigel Farage, saying that actually, I think this is right. whilst Labour is miles ahead, I looked at the latest polling yesterday, Conservatives on 20%, up 2, Labour down 1, but still on 47%, Reform UK third at 11%, down 2. So I still don't believe Labour has this in the bag.
I think you speak to any person in Labour and no one is complacent. No one thinks that going into the election they're going to have this kind of poll lead. Everyone thinks there's going to be a squeeze at some point, but also the Conservatives aren't really delivering anything, and they're not really putting up much of a fight. You're seeing these record numbers of Conservative MPs just quitting before the next election because they don't fancy the fight
the
either.
numbers are extraordinary. We're still not at the record levels, but we're not far off it. What are you hearing in terms of the Conservatives? Is it sort of pack up and head for the hills? It's end of term.
Well, I think so. I don't really have much to say about that because I don't really speak to Conservatives on a regular basis, but the student ones that I do are not too pleased with the Conservative Party. None of them like the direction and they don't think that the leadership is doing a particularly good job. Rishi Sunak's just so wooden, along with Keir Starmer. He might even be more wooden.
I mean, you're right. In fact, watching those two, it's like watching paint dry.
Yeah, I'd probably rather watch paint dry.
And I'd rather watch paint dry. Right, I want to move on, though, to this final subject, if I can. I'm actually fighting at the moment to save a local pub. I think they're really important parts of the community. This is a fascinating article in The Telegraph this morning. A pub is charging customers 50p a pint more if you want to pay at the bar. I had to read it a number of times. So one pub landlord is attempting to break the tradition where you go into the pub, you stand by the bar, you order your beer, but basically by putting another 50p on that. This is Ben Cheshire, who runs the Coronation Pub in Southville in Bristol. He wants people to order drinks via their smartphone using a blinking QR code so you don't go to the bar, and so therefore it's more expensive to go to the bar. A pint of lager is £3.50. Well, that's cheap. At the bar.
Cheap.
It's very cheap. He hasn't been to Gatwick Airport or Stansted Airport. £3.50 at the bar, but only £3 if you order through the QR code. A pint of Guinness is £4.80 when placing the order with the barman. £4.50 when using a smartphone. He says this is the way that we need to go and revolutionise. Aren't we destroying pub culture?
I think he is not doing his business any good by doing that. But if it works, good for him. It would certainly increase its revenue if it works, of course, by definition. I think if we really want to help pubs in this country, we need to be cutting business rates, abolishing beer duty, getting rid of all of the restrictions and al fresco dining. I was once on a planning committee and they were totally against the idea of tables and chairs being outside. But after the pandemic, after tables and chairs were put outside to help businesses, they were all thumbs up for it. And I thought to myself, you opposed me every step of the way when I was on that planning committee backing those tables and chairs outside before the pandemic, and now you're all in favour of them.
Absolutely. And you don't realise what you've got until you've lost it. What do you make about that? 600 pubs are expected to close this year. That's why I said I'm battling the one in my local village, which is closed at the moment.
Keep fighting the good fight. I think when I lived in Southwark, one of the pubs that was going to be turned into an estate agent's, there was a big campaign to stop that happening, and it got designated into an asset of community value, because I think that's what all pubs are. They are community places. The other big thing I think we should all agree, regardless of our differences, to stop is people queuing in lines at the pub. I just think that's outrageous. It's un-British, and needs a practice that needs to be banned. You can't queue in a line. You queue at the bar.
Yeah, you queue at the bar, but then you shouldn't sit at the bar because then you can't get through. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Really good to see you this morning for our head-to-head. That's Lauren Bell-Cross, former Labour advisor, and Charles Amos, who is a political writer.